As she entered the private study to clean, the cleaning lady hummed a lullaby. The millionaire froze. It was the same song his daughter heard before she disappeared 26 years ago. What she said left him speechless. The morning mist clung to the wrought-iron gates of the Whitmore estate, like fingers reluctant to let go of a secret. Emily Dawson adjusted the worn strap of her cleaning supply bag and took a deep breath, tasting the crisp October air that carried hints of old money and manicured gardens. At 28, she'd cleaned enough houses to know that the wealthy lived differently. Their silence was heavier, their shadows longer, and their secrets more carefully polished than their marble floors. "You got this, Em," she whispered to herself, the same pep talk she'd given herself every morning since Margaret had gotten sick. The cancer was eating away at the only mother she'd ever known, and the medical bills were piling up faster than snow in a Detroit winter. This job at the Whitmore mansion was their lifeline. If she could just keep her head down and do the work without getting caught up in whatever drama rich folks carried around like expensive handbags. The massive front door opened before she could knock, revealing a stern-faced woman in her 60s wearing a crisp black uniform. "You must be the new cleaning girl," the woman said, looking Emily up and down like she was inspecting produce at the grocery store. "I'm Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper. You're 5 minutes early." "Good, mister. Whitmore doesn't tolerate lateness." Emily followed Mrs. Patterson through hallways that seemed to stretch on forever, their walls lined with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who looked like they'd never smiled a day in their lives. The click of their footsteps echoed off the marble floors, creating a rhythm that reminded Emily of a heartbeat, slow, steady, and somehow ominous. "The master's study is your primary responsibility," Mrs. Patterson explained, stopping in front of heavy oak doors. "Mr. Whitmore works from home most mornings. He's very particular about his space. Dust the books gently, don't move anything from its designated spot, and under no circumstances are you to touch the papers on his desk." The study was like stepping into another world. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that probably cost more than Emily made in a month. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface meticulously organized with neat stacks of documents and an antique brass letter opener that caught the light filtering through tall windows. Emily had been cleaning for about an hour when she found herself alone in the study. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting warm golden rectangles across the Persian rug, and she felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over her. It was the kind of quiet that felt almost sacred, like being in a church where the only congregation was the ghosts of old stories. Without really thinking about it, she began to hum, a soft, lilting melody that had lived in her head for as long as she could remember. The tune seemed to rise from somewhere deep inside her chest, familiar as her own heartbeat, but mysterious as a half-remembered dream. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word," she sang softly, her voice barely above a whisper as she dusted the bookshelf. "Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird." The melody floated through the air like a butterfly, gentle and weightless. Emily had always wondered where she'd learned this song. Margaret claimed she'd been humming it even as a toddler, back when they'd first found each other in those chaotic early years in Detroit. Sometimes, late at night, when the city noise died down to a whisper, Emily would catch herself singing it and feel an inexplicable ache in her chest, like homesickness for a place she'd never been. "And if that mockingbird won't sing," she continued, her voice growing slightly stronger as she lost herself in the familiar comfort of the lullaby, "Papa's gonna buy you a diamond ring." She was so absorbed in her work and her song that she didn't hear the study door open, didn't notice the tall figure in an expensive charcoal suit who had stopped dead in the doorway, his briefcase slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers and hitting the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. Richard Whitmore stood frozen, his face draining of all color as the sweet melody washed over him like a tsunami of memory. 58 years old, worth more than some small countries, and in this moment he was nothing but a broken father, hearing his baby girl's voice calling to him across 25 years of grief. The briefcase hitting the floor made Emily spin around, her heart jumping into her throat. The man in the doorway looked like he'd seen a ghost. His dark eyes were wide with shock, his hands trembling as they gripped the doorframe for support. This had to be Richard Whitmore himself, and Emily's first thought was that she was about to be fired for singing on the job. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitmore," she stammered, setting down her dust cloth with shaking hands. I didn't mean to disturb you. I know I shouldn't have been singing. It's just that sometimes Where? Richard's voice came out, as barely more than a croak. He cleared his throat and tried again, his eyes never leaving her face. Where did you learn that song? Emily blinked, confused by the intensity in his voice. I don't really know. I've just always known it, I guess, since I was little. Richard took a step into the room, and Emily could see that his legs were unsteady. His face had gone from pale to almost gray, and for a moment she worried he might collapse right there on his expensive Persian rug. Hush, little baby, he whispered, and his voice broke on the words like glass hitting concrete. I used to sing that every night. The silence that followed was so thick, Emily felt like she could reach out and touch it. Richard Whitmore. This powerful man who probably commanded boardrooms full of executives looked utterly shattered. Tears were sliding down his cheeks, and Emily found herself taking an instinctive step toward him before catching herself. Mr. Whitmore, are you okay? Should I call someone? He shook his head slowly, never breaking eye contact. What's your name? Emily Dawson, sir. Emily, he repeated, like he was testing how the word tasted. How old are you, Emily? 28. Something flickered across his face. Hope. Maybe, or recognition. Tell me about this song. When did you first remember knowing it? Emily shifted uncomfortably, not understanding why her lullaby had affected him so profoundly. My mom, my adoptive mom. She says I was humming it when she found me. I was just a little kid, maybe 3 or 4. I have these fragments sometimes. Dreams, I guess. A pink room, a rocking horse, someone singing to me before bedtime. Richard's knees buckled, and he grabbed the edge of his desk for support. Emily moved toward him instinctively, but he held up a hand to stop her. 25 years, he whispered, more to himself than to her. 25 years ago. From the doorway came the sound of approaching footsteps, and Emily turned to see a distinguished older man in an expensive suit hurrying toward them. He had silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but his expression was one of barely concealed alarm as he took in the scene. Richard, what's wrong? I heard a crash and... The man's eyes moved from Richard's tear-streaked face to Emily, and something cold flickered across his features before he composed himself. I'm Charles Benton, Mr. Whitmore's business manager. Is everything all right here? Emily looked between the two men, feeling like she'd stumbled into the middle of something she couldn't begin to understand. All she'd done was sing a simple lullaby, and now the richest man in Boston was crying in his study while his business manager looked at her like she was a bomb that might explode at any moment. I should go, Emily said quietly, gathering her cleaning supplies. I'm sorry if I did something wrong. No. Richard's voice was stronger now, though still shaky. No, Emily, you didn't do anything wrong. Nothing at all. As Emily left the study, she could hear the two men speaking in urgent, hushed tones behind the closed doors. She couldn't make out the words, but the tension in their voices was unmistakable. Whatever had just happened, it was bigger than a simple case of workplace awkwardness. Walking through the mansion's grand hallways toward the service entrance, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn down a road she'd never traveled before. The lullaby still echoed in her head, but now it carried a weight it had never held before, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't even known existed. That night, Emily couldn't get Richard Whitmore's face out of her head. She sat in the cramped kitchen of their Detroit apartment, stirring a cup of tea that had long gone cold, while Margaret dozed fitfully on the couch in the living room. The cancer treatments left her exhausted most days, but tonight she seemed more restless than usual, mumbling words Emily couldn't quite catch. Just a song, Emily whispered to herself, but even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The way Richard had looked at her, like she was a ghost come back to haunt him, suggested something far more complicated than a simple melody. She pulled out her phone and did what any reasonable person in the 21st century would do. She Googled him. Richard Whitmore's life was an open book, at least the public parts. Harvard Business School, married young to Eleanor Blackstone, daughter of another Boston dynasty, built his father's modest shipping company into a multinational empire. But it was the articles from 25 years ago that made Emily's blood run cold. Whitmore heiress kidnapped, read one headline from 1999. 3-year-old Isabella vanishes without trace. Emily's hands trembled as she scrolled through the archived news stories. There were photos of a younger Richard, his face etched with the kind of grief that seemed to age a person overnight. Eleanor Whitmore, beautiful and broken, pleading with cameras for her daughter's safe return. And there, in several of the articles, was a picture of little Isabella, blonde curls, bright blue eyes, and a smile that looked heartbreakingly familiar. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Emily had seen that face in her bathroom mirror every morning for 28 years. "No," she breathed, pushing the phone away, like it had burned her. "That's crazy. That's absolutely insane." But the dreams that had plagued her since childhood suddenly felt less like random nighttime wanderings, and more like memories trying to claw their way to the surface. The pink room with princess wallpaper, the white rocking horse with the silver mane, and always, that deep voice singing her to sleep with promises of mockingbirds and diamond rings. Meanwhile, across the city in his Beacon Hill mansion, Richard Whitmore was having his own sleepless night. He stood in what had once been Isabella's nursery, a room he'd preserved exactly as it was the day she disappeared. The pink walls still bore the hand-painted murals of fairy tale castles that Eleanor had commissioned. The white crib still held the stuffed elephant that Isabella had insisted on carrying everywhere. "Charles, I know it sounds impossible," Richard said into his phone, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and something that might have been hope. But when she sang that song, Christ, Charles! It was like hearing Bella's voice again. On the other end of the line, Charles Benton was pacing his own study, a glass of whiskey forgotten on his desk. "Richard, listen to yourself. You're talking about a girl who just happens to work for your cleaning service. The resemblance could be coincidental. The age is right. The song, Charles. How many people know that particular lullaby? Eleanor used to sing it. And then I did, every single night until..." Richard's voice broke. "What if she's alive? What if my little girl has been out there all this time?" Charles closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 25 years of lies pressing down on his chest like a stone. "Even if there was some impossible coincidence, Richard, you can't put yourself through this again. Remember what happened to Eleanor? The false hopes, the psychics, the supposed sightings that led nowhere? It nearly destroyed her." "It did destroy her," Richard said quietly. "But Charles, I have to know. I have to find out who this girl really is." After hanging up, Charles sat alone in his study, staring at a photograph on his desk. Himself and Richard at Harvard, young and full of dreams they thought money could buy. He'd been Richard's best man at his wedding, Isabella's godfather, the closest thing to a brother Richard had ever had. And he was also the architect of the family's destruction. The gambling debts had seemed manageable at first. A few bad nights at underground poker games, some risky investments that hadn't paid off, but they'd snowballed faster than he could control. And suddenly he owed the kind of money that ended with people disappearing permanently. The solution had seemed elegant in its simplicity. Stage a kidnapping, collect the ransom, and start fresh somewhere far away. He'd never intended for it to go as far as it did. The plan was supposed to be clean. Take the child, collect the money, return her safely, but his associates had been greedier and more vicious than he'd anticipated. When Margaret, the family's governess, had stumbled onto their operation and somehow managed to rescue Isabella before the handoff, everything had spiraled out of control. Charles had spent 25 years believing the little girl was dead, killed by his associates to eliminate witnesses. He'd built his fortune managing Richard's grief-stricken retreat from active business, all while carrying the guilt of what he'd done. And now, impossibly, she might be alive, and working as a cleaning lady in the very house she'd been stolen from. Back in Detroit, Emily was jolted awake by her own screaming. The dream had been more vivid than ever. She was running through halls that looked exactly like the Whitmore mansion, calling for someone whose face she couldn't see, but whose voice she knew as well as her own heartbeat. Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Margaret's voice was weak but concerned as she appeared in Emily's bedroom doorway, leaning heavily on her walker. "Just another nightmare," Emily said, but she was studying Margaret's face in the dim light from the hallway. "Mom, tell me again how you found me." Margaret's expression grew guarded. "Honey, it's 3 a.m. Can't this wait until..." "Please." Emily sat up in bed, pulling her knees to her chest. "I need to know, the whole story, not just the sanitized version you usually tell." Margaret lowered herself carefully onto the edge of the bed, and Emily could see the pain medication wasn't doing much good tonight. You were so little, baby, maybe 3 years old, wandering around downtown Detroit like a lost puppy. No identification, no family looking for you. The system was so overwhelmed back then. What was I wearing? What did I say? You kept asking for Papa, Margaret said softly. You had on this little pink dress with white lace, way too fancy for the neighborhood where I found you, and you were singing that song. You know, the one about the mockingbird. Emily's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Margaret could hear it. Did you ever try to find my real family, run ads in newspapers, contact missing persons databases? Margaret was quiet for so long that Emily thought she might have fallen asleep sitting up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie, sweetheart. Sometimes the past is better left buried. What does that mean? It means you were meant to be my daughter. It means I loved you from the moment I saw you. And that love is what matters. Not where you came from, but where you're going. But as Margaret shuffled back to her own room, Emily caught something in her expression that she'd never noticed before. Not just sadness, but guilt. And maybe, underneath it all, fear. The next morning at the Whitmore mansion felt different. Emily found herself studying every portrait on the walls, looking for familiar features in the painted faces of long-dead ancestors. Mrs. Patterson assigned her to the library, but Emily kept finding excuses to walk past the study where she'd sung yesterday. Around 10 o'clock, she finally encountered Richard in the hallway. He looked like he hadn't slept any more than she had. His usually perfect appearance was rumpled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Emily," he said, and there was something almost reverent in the way he spoke her name. "I was hoping I might see you today. Mr. Whitmore." She clutched her cleaning supplies a little tighter, unsure of what to say. "I hope I didn't upset you yesterday with my singing." "You didn't upset me," he said carefully. "You reminded me of someone very important to me, someone I lost a long time ago." They stood there in the hallway, morning light streaming through tall windows, and Emily felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. One more step, and everything would change forever. "Would you mind?" Richard said hesitantly. "If I asked you a few questions sometime, about your childhood, about that song?" Emily nodded slowly. "I'd like that, actually. I have some questions of my own." Neither of them noticed Charles Benton watching from the shadows at the end of the hall, his face pale and his hands clenched into fists. The past he'd tried so hard to bury was clawing its way to the surface, and he could feel everything he'd built over the last 25 years beginning to crumble around him. 25 years earlier, Charles Benton had always considered himself a smart man, but smart men sometimes made stupid choices when their backs were against the wall. The underground poker game in Chinatown had cost him more than he could afford to lose. Again, as he sat in his Mercedes outside the Whitmore mansion on that crisp October morning in 1999, watching 3-year-old Isabella play in the garden with her nanny, he told himself he was solving problems, not creating them. The men he owed money to weren't the patient type. Tony Marcelli had made that crystal clear when he'd shown Charles the photos of other debtors who'd tried to skip town. The message was simple: pay up or disappear permanently, and Charles Benton had no intention of disappearing. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. He knew the family's routines better than anyone. Richard was in meetings all morning. Eleanor was at her charity luncheon, and Margaret would take Isabella to the park at precisely 2 o'clock for her afternoon walk. A quick snatch, a ransom demand, and then a safe return once the money changed hands. Everyone would be traumatized but alive, and Charles would be free to start over somewhere far from Boston. What he hadn't counted on was Margaret's intuition. "Something's not right," Margaret muttered to herself as she helped Isabella into her little pink coat. The governess had been with the Whitmore family for 15 years, and she'd developed a sixth sense about danger. Maybe it was the way Charles had been asking too many questions about their schedule lately, or the nervous energy that seemed to follow him around the house like a bad smell. Margaret had always suspected that Charles resented her position in the family. She'd seen how his jaw tightened when Richard asked for her opinion on household matters, or when Eleanor praised her work with Isabella. He was the trusted business advisor. But Margaret was the one who knew where Richard kept his reading glasses and how Eleanor liked her coffee in the morning. That kind of intimacy couldn't be bought or earned through Harvard connections. "Come on, sweetheart," Margaret said. lifting Isabella into her arms. "Let's take a different route to the park today." It was that simple change in routine that saved Isabella's life and damned Charles to 25 years of guilt. The black van was waiting on Marlborough Street, just as Charles had arranged. But instead of Margaret and Isabella walking their usual path, the street remained empty. Charles watched from his office window as 2 o'clock came and went, his phone buzzing with increasingly angry texts from Tony's men. By 3 o'clock, panic had set in. Charles called Margaret's cell phone, trying to sound casual. "Just checking on the afternoon walk. Everything okay?" "We're fine." Margaret's voice was cool, suspicious. "Taking a longer route today. Isabella wanted to feed the ducks." Charles hung up, his hands shaking. The plan was falling apart, and Tony's men were not the type to accept excuses. When his phone rang 20 minutes later, he knew what he'd hear before he answered. "Your little friends never showed." Tony's gravelly voice was deadly calm. "My boys don't like being stood up, Charlie. Makes them think you're not serious about our arrangement." "It's just a delay," Charles said desperately. "Tomorrow, same time, I guarantee it." "No guarantees in this business, college boy. You want to play with the big boys? You better learn the rules. Tomorrow you deliver, or we take our payment in a different currency." That night, Charles lay awake staring at the ceiling, knowing he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. But desperation made men do terrible things, and he was too deep in to back out now. The next day, Margaret's suspicions had only grown stronger. She'd noticed Charles hovering near the kitchen that morning, asking casual questions about their plans. When she mentioned taking Isabella to the library instead of the park, she caught something flickering across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration. "I think we'll stay home today," she told Eleanor, who was getting ready for another charity event. "Isabella's been a bit cranky, might be coming down with something." But Charles had anticipated this. He'd learned from yesterday's failure, and desperation had made him bold. When Margaret stepped out to get the mail, leaving Isabella playing in the sunroom, he made his move. "Uncle Charlie!" Isabella squealed with delight when he appeared in the doorway. Charles had been a fixture in her life since birth, bringing presents and playing peekaboo during family dinners. She trusted him completely. "Hey there, princess," Charles said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite suppress. "Want to go for a ride? I have something special to show you." Margaret returned to find the sunroom empty, Isabella's favorite stuffed elephant abandoned on the floor. Her blood turned to ice as she ran through the house, calling Isabella's name. It was only when she reached the front entrance that she saw Charles's Mercedes pulling away from the circular drive, too far away to see inside, but close enough to know that her worst fears had just come true. Margaret didn't call the police. Not yet. Instead, she did something that Charles never could have anticipated. She followed him. Her own car was older and less conspicuous than Charles's luxury sedan, and she'd grown up in neighborhoods where knowing how to tail someone without being spotted was a survival skill. She stayed 3 cars back as Charles drove through downtown Boston, her heart pounding with each turn. The handoff was supposed to happen in a warehouse in Southie, a neighborhood where screams blended into the background noise and questions weren't asked. Margaret watched from across the street as Charles carried Isabella into the building, the little girl still trusting, still thinking this was some kind of game. What happened next would haunt Margaret for the rest of her life. She heard Isabella crying, then shouting, then silence that was somehow worse than any sound. When Charles emerged 20 minutes later, he was alone, his face pale and his hands shaking. Margaret waited until his car disappeared around the corner before she made her move. The warehouse door was unlocked, and she found Isabella bound and gagged in a back room, tears streaming down her little face but very much alive. The men who were supposed to complete the transaction had apparently decided that a traumatized 3-year-old was too much trouble and had left to get drunk before figuring out their next move. "It's okay, baby," Margaret whispered as she untied the ropes with trembling fingers. "Maggie's here. Everything's going to be okay." But even as she said it, Margaret knew that nothing would ever be okay again. If she took Isabella home now, Charles would know she'd witnessed his betrayal. He'd find a way to silence both of them permanently. And if she called the police, would they believe a governess over a Harvard-educated businessman with impeccable references? The solution came to her in a moment of desperate clarity. If Isabella Whitmore was dead to the world, then Emily Dawson could live free from the shadows of Charles Benton's sins, present day, "Richard, you have to let this go," Charles said, settling into the leather chair across from his oldest friend's desk. "I've been doing some research on this Emily girl. She's exactly what she appears to be. A working-class woman from Detroit, trying to support her sick mother." Richard looked up from the private investigator's report he'd been studying. "Her adoption records are sealed. The agency that placed her went out of business 15 years ago, and all their files were supposedly destroyed in a fire. That's not uncommon with older adoptions," Charles said carefully. "The system was different back then, less organized. Sometimes it's better that way. Gives people a chance to move on with their lives instead of dwelling on the past." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "Dwelling." Charles leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I think you're a man who's been through hell. And when someone shows up singing your daughter's lullaby, your heart wants to believe in miracles. But Richard, what are the odds, really?" Richard was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the garden where Isabella used to play. "I had coffee with her yesterday, Emily, just for 20 minutes in the kitchen while Mrs. Patterson was out. And she laughs like Bella did, this little snort when something really tickles her funny bone. And when she's thinking hard about something, she touches her temple with her index finger, just like Eleanor used to do." Charles felt his chest tighten. "Coincidences, Richard. Or maybe you're seeing what you want to see." "Maybe." Richard opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. "But I'm going to find out for sure." Inside the box was a delicate gold chain with a star-shaped pendant. Isabella's baptism gift from her godfather. Charles recognized it immediately because he'd been the one to give it to her, and he'd been the one to rip it from her neck during the kidnapping to make it look more authentic. "I want to give this to Emily," Richard said. "See if it means anything to her." Charles's mouth went dry. He'd kept that necklace all these years, unable to throw it away but afraid to look at it. It was supposed to be at the bottom of Boston Harbor, along with his guilt and the ghost of the little girl he'd tried to sell. "Where did you find that?" Charles asked, proud of how steady his voice sounded. "It was in Isabella's room. I must have put it away and forgotten about it after." Richard's voice trailed off. "Charles, what if she's really alive? What if my little girl has been out there all this time, and I gave up looking for her?" Charles closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 25 years of lies pressing down on him like a tombstone. Even if this Emily person was somehow connected to Isabella. "Richard, think about what that would mean. Someone took your daughter and kept her from you for 25 years. Someone you trusted enough to get close to your family." "I know," Richard said quietly. "And when I find out who that someone is, I'm going to destroy them." Emily's hands were shaking as she climbed the narrow stairs to the mansion's attic. Mrs. Patterson had asked her to organize some old storage boxes, a task that usually would have felt like busy work, but today felt like destiny calling her name. She'd been working at the Whitmore estate for 2 weeks now, and every day brought new moments that felt like pieces of a puzzle she didn't know she was solving. The attic was exactly what you'd expect from a Boston mansion built in the 1890s. All slanted ceilings, exposed beams, and the kind of shadows that seemed to hold secrets. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through a single round window, and the air smelled like old wood and forgotten memories. Emily started with the boxes nearest the window, methodically sorting through decades of accumulated family history. There were Christmas decorations from the 1980s, Eleanor Whitmore's college textbooks, and enough photo albums to document several lifetimes. She found herself lingering over the pictures, studying the faces of people she'd never met, but who somehow felt familiar. It was in the third box that she found it. The photograph was tucked between pages of what looked like a baby book, and when Emily pulled it out, her entire world tilted sideways. It was a professional portrait of a little girl, maybe 3 years old, with blonde curls and bright blue eyes. She was wearing a pink dress with white lace trim and holding a stuffed elephant. And she was smiling with the kind of pure joy that only children could manage. Emily dropped the photo like it had burned her fingers. The little girl in the picture could have been her twin. Or rather, Emily could have been her twin 25 years ago. The resemblance wasn't just striking. It was impossible to deny. "Oh my God," she whispered, picking up the photo with trembling hands. On the back, someone had written in careful script, "Isabella Rose Whitmore, age 3, October 1999. Emily sank onto a dusty trunk, staring at the photograph until her eyes blurred with tears. This was Richard Whitmore's daughter, the little girl who'd been kidnapped 25 years ago, the little girl who'd never been found, the little girl who looked exactly like Emily had at that age. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "How was work today, sweetheart? Feeling better after yesterday's treatment. Love you." Emily stared at the message, her mind racing. Margaret had found her in Detroit when she was 3 years old, right around the time Isabella Whitmore had disappeared. Margaret, who always got nervous when Emily asked too many questions about her past. Margaret, who'd insisted they move apartments every few years when Emily was growing up, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. "This is crazy," Emily said aloud. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. It was the missing piece that made everything else make sense. The dreams about pink rooms and rocking horses, the way Richard had reacted to her lullaby, the inexplicable sense of familiarity she felt walking through this house. Footsteps on the attic stairs made her quickly shove the photograph into her pocket. Mrs. Patterson's head appeared at the top of the stairwell, her expression mildly annoyed. "Emily, what's taking so long up here? You've been gone for over an hour." "Sorry, Mrs. Patterson, there's just so much stuff. I want to make sure I organize it properly." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to tell you he'd like to see you in his study when you're finished here. Said it wasn't urgent. Just when you have a moment." Emily's heart started hammering against her ribs. Did he say what it was about? He didn't, but he seemed, I don't know, hopeful, I guess. Haven't seen him look like that in years. After Mrs. Patterson left, Emily sat alone in the attic for another 20 minutes. Trying to process what she'd discovered, the photograph felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket, but she couldn't bring herself to look at it again. Not yet. She needed to think, needed to figure out what this meant, and what she was going to do about it. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Richard was pacing his study like a caged animal. He'd been working up the courage to show Emily the star necklace for days, but every time he saw her, he lost his nerve. What if he was wrong? What if he was seeing connections that weren't there because he wanted so desperately to believe his daughter was alive? "Pull yourself together," he muttered, straightening his tie in the mirror above the fireplace. "She's just a young woman who happens to sing your daughter's favorite song. That doesn't make her Isabella." But even as he said it, he didn't believe it. The way Emily tilted her head when she was listening carefully, that was pure Eleanor. The way she hummed unconsciously when she was concentrating, that was something Isabella had done as a toddler. And yesterday, when Emily had laughed at something Mrs. Patterson said, Richard had heard an echo of his daughter's giggle so clear it had nearly brought him to his knees. A soft knock on the study door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Whitmore, you wanted to see me." Emily stood in the doorway looking nervous and somehow fragile, and Richard felt his heart clench with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Emily, yes, please, come in. Close the door behind you." She perched on the edge of the chair across from his desk, her cleaning supplies forgotten in the hallway. Richard noticed she kept touching her pocket, like she was carrying something important. "I hope I haven't done anything wrong," Emily said. Mrs. Patterson seemed to think, "You haven't done anything wrong," Richard assured her quickly. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something about your childhood, about your memories before you were adopted." Emily's hand went to her pocket again, and Richard wondered what she was hiding. "What would you like to know? You mentioned having dreams, pink rooms, rocking horses. Can you tell me more about those?" Emily was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "Why is this so important to you, Mr. Whitmore? I mean, I'm just your cleaning lady. Why do you care about some random dreams I had as a kid?" Richard opened his desk drawer and pulled out the velvet box containing Isabella's necklace. "Because 25 years ago, I lost the most important thing in my life. My daughter, Isabella. She was 3 years old when she was taken from me, and I've spent every day since then wondering if she's still alive somewhere." Emily's face went pale. "Mr. Whitmore, I know how this sounds," Richard continued. "I know you must think I'm losing my mind, but when you sang that lullaby, it was like hearing a ghost. Isabella loved that song. I sang it to her every night before bed." Emily's hand was trembling as she reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph. "Is this her? Is this Isabella?" Richard's breath caught in his throat. "Where did you get that?" "I found it in the attic today. I was organizing boxes and it was in what looked like a baby book." Emily held out the photograph with a shaking hand. "Mr. Whitmore, I think I need to tell you something." Richard took the photograph, and for a moment he was transported back 25 years to the day it was taken. Isabella had been so excited about wearing her fancy dress, spinning around the photographer's studio like a tiny ballerina. Eleanor had cried happy tears, and Richard had felt like the luckiest man alive. "She was so beautiful," he whispered. "So full of life. She looks like me," Emily said quietly. "Doesn't she? I mean, when I was little, I looked just like her." Richard raised his eyes from the photograph to Emily's face. Really studying her features for the first time, the bone structure was the same, the shape of her eyes, the way her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, but it was more than physical resemblance. There was something in her expression, a mix of vulnerability and strength that reminded him so strongly of Eleanor. It took his breath away. "Yes," he said simply. "She does look like you, or you look like her." Emily leaned forward in her chair. "Mr. Whitmore, what if I told you that I've been having these dreams my whole life? Dreams about running through hallways that look exactly like this house. Dreams about a man singing to me, a man whose voice sounds like yours. What if I told you that sometimes I wake up crying and I don't know why?" Richard's hands were shaking as he opened the velvet box. "What if I told you that I have something that belonged to Isabella? Something I've kept all these years hoping someday I might be able to give it to her again." The star necklace caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows, its gold surface gleaming like a promise. Emily stared at it, and Richard watched as recognition dawned slowly across her face. "I've dreamed about that necklace," she whispered. "I've dreamed about someone taking it away from me, and I was crying, reaching for it." Richard stood up slowly, his legs unsteady. "Emily, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What did your adoptive mother tell you about the day she found you?" Emily's voice was barely audible. "She said I was wandering around downtown Detroit, alone. No family, no identification. She said I kept asking for Papa and singing that lullaby. And you were 3 years old." "Yes, and this was in October of 1999. Emily nodded, tears starting to slide down her cheeks. "Mr. Whitmore, what are you saying?" Richard came around the desk and knelt in front of her chair, holding the necklace between them like an offering. "I'm saying that I think you might be my daughter Emily. I think you might be Isabella." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and undeniable at the same time. Emily stared at the necklace, at Richard's hopeful face, at the photograph of the little girl who could have been her mirror image. "That's impossible," she whispered. But her hand was already reaching for the necklace, her fingers closing around the star pendant like she'd done it 1,000 times before. And in that moment, with the weight of the necklace familiar against her palm and Richard's eyes full of 25 years of love and grief, Emily felt something click into place, like a key turning in a lock she'd been carrying her whole life without knowing it. Emily drove back to Detroit in a daze, the star necklace burning against her chest, where she'd hidden it beneath her shirt. The 2-hour drive felt like a journey through time, each mile taking her further from the impossible revelation at the Whitmore mansion and closer to the woman who held all the answers. If she was brave enough to ask the right questions. Margaret was sleeping when Emily arrived at their small apartment, her frail form barely making a dent in the hospital bed they'd rented for the living room. The cancer had accelerated over the past month, stealing what little strength the chemo had left her. Dr. Rodriguez had been gentle but direct during their last visit. Weeks, not months. Emily stood in the doorway watching Margaret's labored breathing, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. The photograph, the necklace, Richard's desperate hope. It all felt like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that would either complete a beautiful picture or cut her hands to ribbons trying to put it together. "You're home early." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper, but her eyes were alert as they opened. "How was work, sweetheart?" Emily moved to the chair beside the bed, the one she'd been sleeping in more often than her own bedroom lately. "Mom, we need to talk." Something in Emily's tone made Margaret struggle to sit up straighter. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have." Emily pulled out the photograph of Isabella and placed it on the bedside table where Margaret could see it. "I found this today." Margaret's face went white as snow. Her hands began to tremble, and for a moment Emily thought she might be having some kind of medical emergency. But it wasn't physical pain that made Margaret's breath hitch. It was the weight of 25 years of carefully constructed lies crumbling all at once. "Where did you find this?" Margaret's voice was barely audible. "In the attic at work. Mom, this little girl looks exactly like I did at that age. Exactly like me. Her name was Isabella Whitmore, and she disappeared 25 years ago when she was 3 years old." Margaret closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners to slide down her hollow cheeks. "Oh, Emily, my sweet, sweet girl. Mom, look at me." Emily's voice was gentle but firm. "I need you to tell me the truth, all of it. No more stories about finding me wandering around Detroit. I know you worked for the Whitmore family. I know you were their governess for 15 years. Margaret's eyes opened, and in them Emily saw a lifetime of guilt, love, and carefully guarded secrets. "How did you find out? It doesn't matter how. What matters is that you tell me what really happened, please, Mom. I need to know who I am." Margaret was quiet for so long that Emily began to wonder if she'd fallen asleep. But finally, in a voice broken by pain and confession, she began to speak. "I loved that family," she whispered. 15 years I gave them. I watched Richard grow from a young businessman into the man who built an empire. I helped Eleanor through 2 miscarriages before Isabella was born. And when that beautiful little girl came into the world, I loved her like she was my own blood." Emily reached for Margaret's hand, which felt papery and cold. "What happened to her? What happened to Isabella?" Eleanor was difficult, beautiful, intelligent, but jealous. She never liked how close Isabella was to me, how the child would run to me when she was hurt instead of to her mother. Eleanor started making accusations, said I was undermining her authority, turning her daughter against her. Margaret paused, gathering strength for what came next. She fired me. After 15 years of loyalty, of love, she had security escort me out like I was some kind of criminal. No severance, no references, nothing. I was 55 years old with no family and nowhere to go. "Oh, Mom." Emily felt tears pricking her eyes. "That's horrible, but it doesn't explain." "I was angry," Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger with the force of memory. "Angrier than I'd ever been in my life. I'd given that family everything, and they threw me away like garbage. So when I heard about the kidnapping 2 weeks later, when I saw Charles Benton's nervous behavior in the days leading up to it, Emily's blood turned to ice. You knew about the kidnapping before it happened. Charles was in debt, gambling debt. From what I could piece together, I'd seen the men who came to the house sometimes, rough-looking types who didn't belong in Beacon Hill. I'd heard hushed phone conversations, seen the fear in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Margaret's grip on Emily's hand tightened. I followed him that day, saw him take Isabella from the house, saw him drive to that warehouse in Southie. I should have called the police right then, should have stopped it before it went any further. But I was so angry, so hurt by what Eleanor had done to me. "You wanted them to suffer," Emily said quietly. "God forgive me, yes. I wanted them to feel what it was like to lose something precious. But when I saw what those men were planning to do to that innocent little girl," Margaret's voice broke. "I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't let them hurt her." Emily felt like she was drowning. "So you rescued her. You rescued Isabella." "I waited until Charles left, until those animals went to get drunk and celebrate their payday. Then I went in and got her. She was so scared, crying for her papa, asking why Uncle Charlie had brought her to that scary place. And then what? You brought her home." Margaret shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't take her home, don't you see? Charles would know I'd witnessed everything. He'd find a way to silence both of us. And if I called the police, who would believe a disgruntled ex-employee over Harvard-educated Charles Benton?" Emily felt the world tilting around her. "So you kept her. You kept Isabella." I told myself it was temporary, just until I could figure out how to expose Charles safely. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And that little girl, she was so broken, so traumatized. She'd stopped talking except to ask for her papa. She had nightmares every night. Margaret's voice became tender, remembering. But slowly she started to heal. She started to trust me, to love me, and I fell in love with her all over again, just like I had when she was a baby, when she started calling me Mama instead of Maggie, when she'd curl up in my lap and let me sing her to sleep. "You moved us around constantly when I was little," Emily said, the pieces clicking into place. Different apartments, different neighborhoods. You were hiding. I was protecting you. Charles had connections everywhere. Resources I could never match if he'd found us. Emily pulled the star necklace from beneath her shirt, holding it up so Margaret could see it. Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You kept this, Emily said. All these years, you kept Isabella's necklace. I had to have proof, Margaret whispered, in case something happened to me, in case you ever needed to know the truth. That necklace was the only thing that could prove who you really were. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 25 years of deception settling between them like a thick fog. Emily felt like she was meeting herself for the first time. Not Emily Dawson, the working-class girl from Detroit, but Isabella Whitmore, the stolen heiress who'd been loved by two mothers and betrayed by a man her father trusted. Richard, Emily said finally. My real father. Does he know? Does he suspect? Margaret shook her head weakly. I've been following the family from a distance all these years, reading about Richard in the business papers, keeping track of his life. He never remarried after Eleanor died, never had other children. He spent 25 years grieving for you. And Charles, still there, still playing the loyal friend, managing Richard's affairs, probably siphoning money from the very fortune that should be yours. Emily felt a surge of anger so pure it took her breath away. Charles Benton had stolen her life, stolen 25 years with her real father, and he was still there, still trusted, still profiting from his betrayal. What am I supposed to do with this? Emily asked. How do I even begin to process this? Margaret struggled to reach the drawer in the bedside table. There's an envelope in there, everything I saved, the clothes you were wearing that day, the original articles about the kidnapping, photographs of you and the family from before. Emily opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a tiny pink dress with white lace, exactly like the one Isabella had been wearing in the photograph. There were newspaper clippings, family photos, and at the bottom, a letter in Margaret's careful handwriting. I wrote that last week, Margaret said, when I knew I was running out of time. It's everything. Dates, locations, details about the kidnapping that only someone who was there would know. It's my confession, but it's also your proof. Emily looked at the woman who'd raised her, loved her, protected her for 25 years, and who'd also stolen her from her real family. The emotions warring in her chest were too complex to untangle. Love and betrayal, gratitude and anger, understanding and condemnation. Do you regret it? Emily asked. Keeping me from my real father all these years? Margaret was quiet for a long time before answering. I regret the circumstances that led to it. I regret Charles's betrayal and my own anger and pride. But Emily, sweetheart, I could never regret loving you. These 25 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. I love you too. Mom, Emily said, and meant it despite everything. But I have to tell him. I have to tell Richard who I am. I know, Margaret whispered. And you have to stop Charles before he hurts anyone else. He's dangerous, Emily. More dangerous than you know. If he realizes you're alive, if he knows you remember... Margaret's words were cut off by a violent coughing fit that left her gasping for breath. Emily held her gently until the spasms passed, feeling how fragile she'd become. Promise me something, Margaret said when she could speak again. Promise me you'll be careful. Charles has spent 25 years believing his secret was safe. He won't give up without a fight. Emily nodded, clutching the envelope of evidence against her chest. I promise. As Margaret drifted back to sleep, Emily sat in the growing darkness of their small apartment, trying to reconcile the girl she'd been with the woman she was becoming. Tomorrow, she would have to face Richard with the truth that would either heal his broken heart or destroy them both. But tonight, she would hold vigil over the woman who'd loved her enough to steal her, and forgive her for loving her enough to lie. Emily arrived at the Whitmore mansion the next morning with Margaret's confession letter burning like a coal in her jacket pocket. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and rehearsing different ways to tell Richard Whitmore that his dead daughter was actually alive and cleaning his floors. None of the scenarios in her head had ended well. Mrs. Patterson greeted her at the service entrance with an unusually stern expression. Emily, Mr. Whitmore wants to see you in his study immediately. And honestly, dear, whatever's going on between you two, I hope you know what you're doing. He's been pacing like a caged lion since 6 this morning. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as she knocked on the study door. Mr. Whitmore, you wanted to see me. Emily, thank God. Richard opened the door so quickly she wondered if he'd been standing right behind it. His hair was disheveled, his usually perfect appearance rumpled, and his eyes held the wild look of a man who'd spent the night wrestling with impossible hope. I've been thinking about yesterday, about the necklace, about everything you said. I need to know for certain. Mr. Whitmore, DNA test, Richard said, running his hands through his hair. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't get your face out of my head. The way you looked at that necklace, like you'd seen it before. The way you knew about the pink room, the rocking horse. I've arranged for a private lab to come here this morning if you're willing. Emily pulled the star necklace from beneath her shirt, letting it catch the morning light streaming through the windows. I don't think we need a DNA test, Mr. Whitmore. Richard's breath caught in his throat. You're wearing it. I've been wearing it since yesterday, and last night. Emily's voice broke slightly. Last night I remembered putting it on for the first time. You gave it to me for my baptism. Charles was there. Uncle Charlie, I called him. He said I looked like a little princess. The color drained from Richard's face. How could you possibly know that? That ceremony was private, just family and close friends. Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out Margaret's letter, her hands trembling. Because I am Isabella, Mr. Whitmore. I'm your daughter. Richard staggered backward, groping for his desk chair. That's impossible. Isabella is dead. She's been dead for 25 years. No, she hasn't. Emily moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. She's been alive in Detroit, being raised by a woman who loved her but could never tell her the truth. A woman who's dying now and finally found the courage to confess what really happened. Richard's face cycled through disbelief, hope, and terror in the span of seconds. Emily, please don't do this to me. Don't make me believe something that isn't true. I couldn't survive losing her again. Read this, Emily said, placing Margaret's letter on his desk. It's all there. How Charles orchestrated the kidnapping to pay his gambling debts. How Margaret followed him and rescued me before those men could sell me. How she's been protecting me ever since. Richard stared at the letter like it might explode. Charles, you're saying Charles was involved in Isabella's kidnapping? More than involved. He planned it. He's the reason your daughter disappeared, Mr. Whitmore. He's the reason Eleanor died thinking her baby was dead. The study door burst open, and Charles Benton strode in with the confidence of a man who'd never been questioned in 25 years. Richard, I got your message about the DNA test, really. This has gone far enough. You can't keep tormenting yourself with false hopes about every blonde girl who... Charles stopped mid-sentence when he saw Emily holding the star necklace. The blood drained from his face so quickly Emily thought he might faint. Where did you get that? Charles's voice was barely a whisper. You should recognize it, Emily said, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. You're the one who ripped it off my neck 25 years ago. Charles looked frantically between Emily and Richard, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Richard, whatever this girl has told you, whatever game she's playing, it's not a game, Richard said, his voice deadly quiet as he picked up Margaret's letter. According to this confession, you orchestrated my daughter's kidnapping to pay off gambling debts. You let me believe she was dead for 25 years while you sat in my house, ate at my table, and managed my money. That's insane, Charles said, but his voice was shaking. Richard, think about what you're saying. I'm your oldest friend. I've been by your side through everything. Have you? Richard stood up slowly, and Emily could see the rage building in his eyes. Or have you been playing a 25-year-long con, stealing from me while I grieved for a daughter who was alive the whole time? Charles's mask finally slipped completely. The charming, sophisticated businessman disappeared, replaced by something desperate and dangerous. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Those men would have killed me if I didn't pay them back. So you sold my daughter instead. It wasn't supposed to go that far, Charles shouted. It was supposed to be simple. A quick kidnapping, a ransom payment, then she'd be returned safely. But that meddling bitch Margaret had to interfere and ruin everything. The admission hung in the air like a poison cloud. Richard's face went white with fury, and Emily felt a chill run down her spine at the venom in Charles's voice. My God, Richard whispered. It's true. It's all true. Charles seemed to realize what he'd just confessed to. His eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. "Richard, listen to me. We can work this out. I can make this right. Make it right." Richard's voice was rising. "You destroyed my family. You killed my wife as surely as if you'd put a gun to her head. Eleanor died believing our daughter was dead because of you. I never meant for Eleanor to—" "Get out." Richard's voice was ice cold. "Get out of my house before I do something we'll both regret." But Charles didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his cell phone with shaking fingers. "You don't understand what you're doing, Richard. If this information becomes public, if people find out what really happened—" "Are you threatening me?" Richard asked incredulously. "I'm trying to protect us both," Charles said desperately. "Do you have any idea what this will do to your reputation, to the company, and this girl, if she really is Isabella? She's been missing for 25 years. There will be investigations, media attention, questions about why she never came forward before." Emily found her voice. "Because Margaret was protecting me from you. She knew that if you found out I was alive, you'd try to silence me permanently." Charles's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Margaret always was too smart for her own good. I spent years wondering what happened to you after the kidnapping went wrong. I assumed you were dead." "You hoped I was dead," Emily corrected. "Can you blame me? You're the only witness to what really happened, the only person who could connect me to the kidnapping." Richard moved protectively in front of Emily. "Charles, I'm warning you. Leave now, and maybe we can handle this quietly. Stay, and I'm calling the police." Charles looked at his oldest friend, his face twisted with 25 years of guilt and desperation. "You really think it's that simple? You think after all this time, after everything we've built together, you can just throw me away? You threw yourself away the day you decided my daughter's life was worth less than your gambling debts." For a moment, Charles looked like he might argue further. Then his shoulders sagged, and Emily saw him age 10 years in as many seconds. "I loved her too, you know, Isabella. She was my goddaughter. Do you think this has been easy for me? Do you think I haven't regretted it every single day? Not enough to confess," Richard said coldly. "Not enough to give me back my daughter." Charles pulled out his phone again, but this time his fingers were dialing a number. "I'm sorry, Richard. I'm sorry it has to end this way." "Who are you calling?" Emily asked, a chill of fear running down her spine. Charles didn't answer, but the cold smile that spread across his face told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't calling a lawyer or the police. He was calling the same type of men who'd helped him 25 years ago. Men who solved problems permanently. "Hang up the phone, Charles," Richard said, his voice deadly serious. "It's too late for that," Charles replied, and Emily could hear someone answering on the other end of the line. "I have a situation that needs to be handled. 2 loose ends that need tying up." Richard lunged for the phone, but Charles was already backing toward the door. "This is bigger than just me now, Richard. There are other people involved. People who have a lot to lose if this story comes out. People who won't hesitate to clean up my mess. Charles, don't do this. Whatever mistakes you've made, we can—" But Charles was already running, his footsteps echoing through the mansion's hallways like gunshots. Richard started to follow, but Emily grabbed his arm. "Let him go," she said urgently. "We need to call the police right now, and we need to get Margaret somewhere safe." Richard looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since she'd walked into his life, Emily saw him seeing not just a resemblance to his lost daughter, but Isabella herself. "My little girl," he whispered, reaching out to touch her face with trembling fingers. "My brave, beautiful little girl. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." Emily leaned into his touch, feeling 25 years of longing and loss bridging in a single moment. "You couldn't have known, Dad, but we can protect each other now." The word "Dad" seemed to break something loose in Richard's chest. He pulled Emily into a fierce hug, and she could feel him shaking with 25 years of suppressed grief and overwhelming joy. "I thought I'd lost you forever," he whispered into her hair. "You didn't lose me," Emily whispered back. "I just took the long way home." But even as they held each other, Emily could hear the echo of Charles's phone call in her head. The danger wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Charles had spent 25 years covering his tracks, and desperate men with everything to lose were capable of anything. The The police arrived at the Whitmore mansion within 20 minutes of Richard's call, but Emily could tell from Detective Maria Santos's expression that explaining the situation wasn't going to be simple. How do you tell a veteran Boston cop that a kidnapping victim from 25 years ago has been cleaning her father's house without either of them knowing it? Let me get this straight, Detective Santos said, sitting across from Richard and Emily in the study. You're telling me that Emily Dawson is actually Isabella Whitmore, who was kidnapped in 1999, and that your business manager Charles Benton orchestrated the whole thing. I know how it sounds, Richard said, handing over Margaret's confession letter. But we have evidence, written testimony from the woman who rescued Isabella, physical evidence from the kidnapping, and Charles himself essentially confessed when confronted. Detective Santos read through Margaret's letter with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of human deception. This is certainly detailed, but Mrs. What's her last name? Davidson, Emily supplied. Margaret Davidson. She's in hospice care right now, terminal cancer. We'll need to interview her as soon as possible, Santos said, and we'll need to process this DNA evidence to confirm your identity, Miss Dawson. Even with all this documentation, we need scientific proof before we can move forward with charges. Detective, there's something else, Emily said urgently. When Charles left here, he made a phone call. He said something about loose ends needing to be tied up. About other people being involved who have a lot to lose. I think he's going to try to hurt Margaret. Santos looked up sharply. Are you saying he threatened you? Not directly, but the implication was clear. He's had 25 years to build a network, to involve other people in covering this up. Now that the truth is coming out, we need to get to Margaret, Richard said, standing abruptly. If something happens to her because of this, Mr. Whitmore, sit down, Santos said firmly. If there is a credible threat, we'll handle it, but I need you both to stay calm and let us do our job. Where is Mrs. Davidson now? Emily gave the detective Margaret's address, her hand shaking as she wrote it down. She can barely get out of bed, detective. She's completely helpless. I'll send a unit to check on her and provide protection if necessary, Santos assured her. In the meantime, I need you both to go through everything again, step by step, and I need contact information for Charles Benton. As Emily recounted her story for the third time, she noticed Richard watching her with an expression of wonder and grief. Every detail she remembered, the pink room, the rocking horse, the way Charles used to bring her candy when he visited, seemed to confirm what they both already knew in their hearts. There's something else, Richard said when Emily finished. About 2 weeks ago, Charles suggested I hire a new cleaning service. He specifically recommended the company Emily works for. At the time, I thought it was just coincidence, but now you think he orchestrated your reunion? Santos asked. It's possible. Charles always was a planner, and he'd been acting strange lately, more nervous, drinking more, asking odd questions about my will and inheritance plans. Emily felt a chill. What if he wasn't trying to reunite us? What if he was trying to figure out if I remembered anything? Testing the waters to see if I was a threat. Before anyone could answer, Detective Santos's radio crackled to life. Detective Santos, we have a problem at the Davidson address. The front door was forced open, and there are signs of a struggle. No sign of the resident. Emily's blood turned to ice. Oh God, they took her. They took Margaret. Richard grabbed her hand as she started to hyperventilate. Emily, breathe. We'll find her. You don't understand, Emily gasped. She can barely walk if they moved her, if they hurt her. Santos was already on her feet, speaking rapidly into her radio. I need all available units to canvass the area around the Davidson residence. We're looking for an elderly woman, possibly taken against her will. Consider the suspects armed and dangerous. Emily's phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through the tension like a knife. The number was blocked, but she knew who it was before she answered. Emily. Charles's voice was strained, desperate. I hope you're happy with yourself. Where is she, Charles? Where's Margaret? Somewhere safe for now, but that could change very quickly. Richard grabbed the phone from Emily's hand. Charles, this is madness. Let Margaret go. She's a dying woman who poses no threat to you. She poses a threat to a lot of people, Richard. You have no idea how deep this goes. How many lives will be ruined if her confession becomes public? What are you talking about? Richard demanded. The judge who sealed the adoption records. He was paid, the police detective who led the original investigation. He made evidence disappear. The social worker who processed Emily's fake identity. She created an entire false history. This wasn't just my operation. Richard, I had help. And those people have spent 25 years building careers and families on the foundation of this secret. Emily felt sick. The corruption had tentacles reaching everywhere, infecting people she'd never even heard of. What do you want? Charles, I want you to disappear again. Both of you. Take Richard and go somewhere far away, start new lives, and never speak of Isabella Whitmore again. In exchange, Margaret lives out her remaining days in peace. That's not going to happen, Richard said firmly. Then you'll be responsible for what happens to her. And Emily, sweet little Isabella, you'll have to live with the knowledge that your selfishness killed the only mother you've ever known. The line went dead. Detective Santos immediately began coordinating with the phone company to trace the call. But Emily knew it was probably hopeless. Charles had been covering his tracks for 25 years. He wouldn't make amateur mistakes now. We have to find her, Emily said, tears streaming down her face. I can't lose her. Not like this. Richard pulled her into his arms, and Emily realized that in the space of 24 hours, she'd gained a father and might lose a mother. The cruel irony of it made her want to scream. Detective, what about the other people Charles mentioned? Richard asked. The judge, the detective, the social worker? If they're all involved, can we trust the system to handle this? I understand your concern, Mr. Whitmore, but I can assure you that the Boston Police Department takes corruption very seriously. If what Charles says is true, we'll root out every person involved. Emily wasn't so sure. If Charles had been operating undetected for 25 years, if he had judges and police officers in his pocket, then how could they trust anyone? How could they know who was clean and who was compromised? There's something else we need to consider, Emily said slowly. Charles said I should disappear again. But what if instead of running away, we make this as public as possible? If we go to the media, tell the whole story, then it becomes harder for them to just make us disappear. That's dangerous, Santos warned. Media attention could interfere with our investigation, and it could put you both at greater risk. We're already at risk, Richard pointed out. At least if the story is public. If something happens to us, people will know why. Emily's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Channel 7 News, 8 p.m. tonight, come alone, or Margaret dies slowly. They want me to go on television, Emily said, showing the message to the others. But they want me to come alone. Absolutely not, Richard said immediately. It's obviously a trap. Maybe, Emily said. But what if it's not? What if Charles really does just want me to disappear? If I go on TV and publicly renounce any claim to the Whitmore name, say it was all a mistake, maybe he'll let Margaret go. Emily, you can't seriously be considering this. She's dying anyway. Dad, the word still felt strange on Emily's tongue. But right too. She has weeks, maybe days left, if sacrificing my identity can give her a peaceful death instead of a violent one. No, Richard's voice was firm. I just got my daughter back. I'm not losing her again to that monster. Detective Santos looked between them. We could set up surveillance at the TV station, try to catch Charles when he shows up. He won't show up himself, Emily said. He's too smart for that. He'll have someone else watching. Someone we don't know about. The room fell silent as they all contemplated their limited options. Emily thought about Margaret lying somewhere, probably scared and in pain, suffering because Emily had insisted on seeking the truth. Maybe Charles was right. Maybe some secrets were better left buried. There's another option, Richard said quietly. We give Charles what he really wants, which is money. Charles has always been motivated by money. His gambling addiction 25 years ago, his embezzlement over the years. I've been reviewing the books since yesterday, and there are discrepancies going back decades. He's been stealing from me for years. So, we offer him a payoff to let Margaret go. We offer him enough money to disappear forever. Enough to start over somewhere far away where he can't hurt anyone else. Detective Santos shook her head. Mr. Whitmore, I can't be party to negotiating with a kidnapper, and paying him off doesn't guarantee he won't come back for more. It does if he's dead, Richard said coldly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Emily looked at her father, this man she'd known for less than a week, but who was already willing to kill to protect her, and realized that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. The Whitmore family had money and power, but they also had the ruthlessness to use both when necessary. Dad, we're not killers, aren't we? Richard's eyes were hard as diamonds. Charles destroyed our family 25 years ago. He spent decades living off my money while I grieved for a daughter he'd stolen. He's holding a dying woman hostage to protect his own skin. At what point does justice become vengeance? Emily realized that her father was right. They were past the point of legal solutions. Charles had too many connections, too many people who would protect him to save themselves. If they wanted Margaret back alive, if they wanted to be safe, they would have to play by Charles's rules, which meant someone was going to die before this was over. Detective Santos had barely finished coordinating with her team when Emily's phone rang again. This time it wasn't Charles. It was a voice she didn't recognize, rough and gravelly with a Boston accent thick as molasses. You got 10 minutes to get out of that mansion, Princess. Alone, any cops follow you. The old lady starts losing fingers. The line went dead before Emily could respond. She stared at the phone, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. What did they say? Richard demanded. They want me to leave now, alone, or they'll hurt Margaret. Emily was already moving toward the door. I have to go. Like hell you do, Richard said, grabbing her arm. Emily, this is exactly what they want. To separate us. To get you alone and vulnerable. Detective Santos stepped between them. Nobody's going anywhere without backup. This is a police matter now. But Emily's phone buzzed with a text that made her blood freeze. A photo of Margaret tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Her face bruised and terrified. The message beneath read, 9 minutes now. Come alone or she dies. I'm sorry, Emily said. And before anyone could stop her, she bolted from the study. She could hear Richard and Detective Santos shouting behind her, hear footsteps pounding after her through the mansion's corridors. But Emily had always been fast. Years of running to catch buses in Detroit had given her the kind of speed that came from necessity, and she knew the mansion's layout well enough by now to find the quickest route to the service entrance. She was in her car and pulling away from the estate. Before Richard even made it to the driveway, Emily's phone immediately started ringing. Richard, Detective Santos, numbers she didn't recognize. She ignored them all, focusing on the road ahead and trying not to think about what she was driving toward. The instructions had been simple. Drive to the old Seaport district, park at Pier 47, and wait for further contact. The Seaport had been gentrified in recent years, turned into a playground for tech companies and expensive restaurants. But there were still abandoned corners, forgotten warehouses from Boston's industrial past that developers hadn't gotten to yet. Perfect places to hide a kidnapped woman. Emily parked where instructed and sat in her car, engine running, watching the sunset paint Boston Harbor in shades of orange and red. The beauty of it felt obscene given the circumstances. How could the world look so peaceful when Margaret was suffering because of choices Emily had made? Her phone rang. Unknown number. Very good, Princess. Now walk to the end of the pier. Slowly, hands where we can see them. Emily got out of the car, her legs unsteady on the weathered wooden planks of the pier. The harbor stretched out before her, dotted with boats and the distant lights of Logan Airport. Behind her, she could hear the city humming with evening traffic, people heading home to their families, completely unaware of the drama playing out just a few miles away. That's far enough, the voice said when she reached the end of the pier. Turn around. Emily turned and found herself face to face with two men who looked like they'd stepped out of a movie about organized crime. The taller one had silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail about her. The shorter one was built like a linebacker and had the kind of scarred hands that spoke of a lifetime of violence. So you're the famous Isabella Whitmore, the tall one said. Gotta say, Charlie described you different. Where's Margaret? Safe, for now. Whether she stays that way depends on how reasonable you're willing to be. Emily's phone buzzed with another text. This one showing Margaret in what looked like a different location. Tied up in the back of a van. She looks scared, Emily said. She should be. 25 years is a long time to keep a secret, and Charlie's got a lot of people who depend on that secret staying buried. What do you want? The tall man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We want you to get back in that car, drive to the airport, and disappear. Tonight. Forever. New name, new life, somewhere far from Boston. And if I don't, then Margaret Davidson dies tonight. And tomorrow morning your father finds your body floating in the harbor. Tragic murder-suicide. Wealthy businessman can't handle losing his daughter twice." Emily felt ice form in her veins. "You'd kill Richard, too. Nothing personal, princess. But this thing has gotten too big, too messy. Charlie was supposed to handle this quietly, but he's lost his nerve. Now we got cops sniffing around, DNA tests, confession letters, too many loose ends. How many people are involved in this? More than you'd think. Charlie wasn't lying about the reach. Judges, cops, social workers, adoption agencies. You'd be amazed how many people will look the other way for the right price." Emily's mind raced. These weren't just criminals. They were part of a network that had been operating for decades, using kidnapped children to supply illegal adoption markets. Isabella Whitmore hadn't been Charles's first victim. She'd just been the one that got away. "I need to see Margaret first," Emily said. "I need proof she's alive." The linebacker pulled out his phone and made a call. "Yeah, put the old lady on." A moment later, Emily could hear Margaret's weak voice. "Emily, sweetheart, don't do whatever they're asking. Don't sacrifice yourself for me. I'm dying anyway." The connection cut off. The tall man smiled again. "Satisfied. I'll need time to arrange things. Passport, money, transportation. You can't expect me to just vanish without preparation. You got 2 hours. There's a private jet waiting at Hanscom Field. You'll be in Montreal by midnight, and from there, you disappear forever. And Margaret gets to die peacefully in a hospital bed instead of the bottom of the harbor." Emily nodded slowly, buying time and trying to think of any way out of this nightmare. "I'll need to get some things from my apartment. Say goodbye to..." "No goodbyes, no detours. You drive straight to Hanscom, get on that plane, and never look back." But even as Emily nodded agreement, she could see movement in the shadows behind the two men, dark figures moving with the practiced stealth of tactical units. Detective Santos hadn't been as far behind as Emily had thought. "There's just one problem with your plan," Emily said, raising her voice slightly. "What's that, princess?" "You're assuming I'm going to cooperate." The warehouse windows around the pier suddenly blazed with spotlights, turning night into day. "Police, drop your weapons." The two men spun around, the linebacker reaching for a gun inside his jacket. But before he could draw it, red laser dots appeared on both their chests. "I wouldn't!" Detective Santos's voice boomed through a megaphone. "You're surrounded! There's nowhere to run!" Emily dove behind a concrete barrier as chaos erupted around her. The tall man was shouting into his phone, probably warning whoever had Margaret to kill her now that the operation was blown. The linebacker was trying to use Emily as a human shield, but she was already rolling away from him toward the relative safety of the patrol cars. Gunshots echoed across the water as the two men made a desperate attempt to fight their way out. Emily pressed herself against the concrete, her ears ringing from the noise, and prayed that Margaret was still alive somewhere in the city. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. Emily raised her head to see both men on the ground, the linebacker clearly dead, the tall one wounded but still conscious. Detective Santos was already on her radio, coordinating with units across the city to track down the van where Margaret was being held. "Emily," Richard's voice cut through the noise as he ran toward her, having apparently followed the police despite orders to stay back. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," Emily said, letting him pull her into his arms. "But Margaret, we'll find her," Santos assured them, kneeling beside the wounded man. "This one's going to tell us exactly where she is, aren't you?" The tall man looked up at her with hatred in his eyes. "Go to hell." "You first," Santos replied. 25 years of kidnapping, murder, and corruption. You're looking at life without parole if you're lucky. But if you cooperate, if you help us find Margaret Davidson alive, maybe we can work something out." Emily watched the man's face, seeing him calculate his options. He was a professional criminal, probably arrested before, knew how these negotiations worked. The question was whether his loyalty to Charles and the network was stronger than his desire to save his own skin. "The van's at the old fish processing plant on Northern Avenue," he said finally. "But you better hurry. Charlie's orders were to kill her if anything went wrong." Detective Santos was already running toward her car, shouting coordinates into her radio. Richard and Emily followed, Emily's heart pounding with the terrifying knowledge that they might already be too late. As they raced through Boston's streets, sirens wailing, Emily realized that everything that had happened, Margaret's kidnapping, the threats, even her own capture, had been orchestrated to draw out all the players in Charles's network. But if Margaret died because of this gambit, Emily would never forgive herself. The fish processing plant loomed ahead, dark and abandoned, its broken windows staring out like dead eyes. Emily could see the van parked behind the building, and her heart sank when she realized how quiet everything was. Too quiet for someone still alive inside. The tactical team moved through the abandoned fish processing plant like shadows, their boots silent on the debris-strewn concrete floors. Emily crouched behind a police car with Richard, both of them watching the operation unfold with held breath. The van they'd spotted was empty, its back doors hanging open like a scream frozen in time. Buildings clear on the first floor, came the crackling voice over Detective Santos's radio. Moving to the second level, Emily's hands were clenched so tightly, her nails were drawing blood from her palms. Every second that passed without word about Margaret felt like a lifetime. Richard kept his arm around her shoulders, but she could feel the tension radiating from his body like heat from a furnace. "Contact," the radio crackled again. "Second floor, northeast corner, we have a hostage situation." Detective Santos grabbed her megaphone. "This is the Boston Police Department. Release your hostage and come out with your hands visible." A voice echoed from the broken windows above. Not Charles, but someone younger, more desperate. "Back off, or the old lady dies." "I mean it." Emily couldn't stand it anymore. "I'm going in there." "Like hell you are," Richard said, tightening his grip on her arm. "Dad, listen to me. Whoever's up there, they're scared. They're probably some low-level guy Charles left to clean up his mess. They don't want to be here any more than Margaret does." "Emily's right," Detective Santos said reluctantly. "These situations sometimes de-escalate better with a personal connection. But we'd need to wire you up, and there are no guarantees." "No wires," Richard interrupted. "If they detect surveillance equipment, they'll kill Margaret immediately." He stood up, his face set with grim determination. "I'm going in instead." "Dad, no." "Emily, I've already lost 25 years with you. I'm not losing the woman who saved your life." Richard's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. "Margaret loved you enough to steal you from me. The least I can do is love you enough to save her." Before anyone could stop him, Richard was walking toward the building's entrance, his hands raised and visible. "My name is Richard Whitmore," he called out. "I'm the father of the girl you're trying to hurt. I want to talk." Emily tried to follow, but Detective Santos held her back. "Let him try. Your father knows what he's doing." But Emily wasn't so sure. Richard Whitmore was a brilliant businessman, but this wasn't a boardroom negotiation. This was life and death, and the man upstairs holding Margaret hostage sounded like he was barely holding on to his sanity. Richard's voice echoed through the building as he climbed the stairs. "I'm coming up. I'm unarmed. I just want to talk about ending this peacefully." "Stay back," the voice screamed from above. "I'll kill her. I swear I will." "I believe you," Richard called back, his voice calm and steady. "But killing her won't solve your problems. It'll just create bigger ones." Emily could hear their voices growing closer as Richard reached the second floor. Through her earpiece, Santos had insisted on at least giving them audio surveillance. She could hear Margaret's labored breathing and what sounded like someone pacing back and forth on creaky floorboards. "You're Richard Whitmore?" the gunman asked, and Emily could hear the awe in his voice despite his desperation. "The billionaire." "That's right. Which means I can solve whatever problem Charles left you with. Money, transportation, protection. Whatever you need to walk away from this." "You don't understand," the man said. And Emily could hear tears in his voice now. "Charlie said if this went wrong, if the cops got involved, I was supposed to kill the old lady and myself. Said it was the only way to keep the network safe. The network's already blown," Richard said gently. "We caught 2 of Charles's men at the pier tonight. They're talking, telling us everything. The judges, the cops, the whole operation. It's over." "Then I'm dead anyway," the gunman sobbed. "If I don't follow orders, if I let her live, they'll kill my family. My wife, my kids. They'll make them suffer for what I didn't do. Emily felt her heart break for this stranger who'd been caught in Charles's web just like everyone else. How many lives had been destroyed by one man's greed and cowardice? "What's your name?" Richard asked. Tommy Marchetti. Tommy, how old are your kids?" 8 and 10, Sophie and Michael. "I have a daughter too. Have. Richard's voice caught slightly. "She was stolen from me when she was 3 years old. 25 years, I thought she was dead because of Charles Benton's lies." Emily could hear the pain in her father's voice, and she realized he was doing more than just trying to save Margaret. He was exercising 25 years of grief and rage, finally confronting the consequences of Charles's betrayal. "The woman you're holding, Margaret, she's the one who saved my daughter. She rescued her from the men Charles sold her to, raised her as her own, protected her all these years. She's dying, Tommy. Cancer. She has days, maybe weeks left." "I know," Tommy whispered. "She keeps asking me to let her go home to die in peace." "Then let her," Richard said. "Let her go home, and I'll make sure you and your family are protected. I have resources Charles could never dream of. I can make you disappear safely, give you new identities, enough money to start over anywhere in the world." Emily held her breath, waiting for Tommy's response. Through the earpiece, she could hear Margaret trying to speak, her voice weak but determined. "Tommy," Margaret said, and Emily's heart clenched at how frail she sounded. "I know you don't want to hurt me. I can see it in your eyes. You're a good man, caught in a bad situation. I don't have a choice," Tommy said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "There's always a choice," Margaret replied. "I made one 25 years ago when I chose love over revenge, when I chose to save a little girl instead of letting her disappear forever. You can make the same choice now. But my family will be safe," Richard promised. "I give you my word, Tommy, the word of a father who knows what it means to lose everything. Help me save the woman who saved my daughter, and I'll make sure your children never have to pay for Charles Benton's sins." The silence stretched on so long, Emily began to wonder if something had gone wrong. Then she heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor above. "Okay," Tommy said finally. "Okay, I'm putting the gun down. But Mr. Whitmore, if you're lying to me, if anything happens to my family, nothing will happen to them," Richard assured him. "You have my word." Emily watched through the building's entrance as figures appeared at the top of the staircase. Richard was helping Margaret walk, her arm draped around his shoulders, while Tommy followed behind with his hands raised in surrender. The tactical team moved in smoothly, securing Tommy without violence while Emes rushed to Margaret's side. "Emily." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper, but Emily heard it clearly as she ran into the building. "My sweet girl, are you hurt?" "I'm fine." "Mom," Emily said, kneeling beside the stretcher as the EMTs prepared to transport Margaret to the hospital. "I'm so sorry this happened. I'm so sorry I dragged you into this." "Hush," Margaret said, reaching up to touch Emily's face with a trembling hand. "You didn't drag me into anything. I've been in this from the beginning." She looked over at Richard, who was standing nearby with his hands shaking from adrenaline. "Take care of her. Take care of our girl." "I will," Richard promised. "And Margaret, thank you for everything, for saving her, for loving her, for giving me the chance to be her father again." Margaret smiled, and for a moment Emily could see the strong, determined woman who'd risked everything to save a little girl 25 years ago. "She's the best thing I ever did with my life." As the ambulance pulled away, its sirens wailing into the Boston night, Emily felt Richard's arm around her shoulders. They stood together in the parking lot of the abandoned plant, watching the red and blue lights fade into the distance. "Is it over?" Emily asked. "The immediate danger, yes," Richard said. "But Charles is still out there, and he still has resources, connections. We need to be careful. What about Tommy and his family?" "I meant what I said. They'll be protected. New identities, new lives, somewhere Charles can never find them." Richard looked down at her, his face serious. "Are you ready for what comes next, Emily? The media attention, the legal proceedings, the complete upheaval of both our lives." Emily thought about Margaret lying in that hospital bed, thought about Charles somewhere in the shadows still pulling strings, thought about all the other families who'd been destroyed by this network of corruption and greed. "I'm ready," she said. "But first, I want to go to the hospital. I want to be with Margaret." "Of course," Richard said. "We'll face whatever comes together. All three of us, as a family." As they drove through Boston's quiet streets toward the hospital, Emily realized that she'd found something she'd been searching for her entire life without knowing it. The complete truth about who she was and where she belonged. It had cost them all more than she'd ever imagined, but for the first time in 25 years, the Whitmore family was whole again. Now they just had to stay alive long enough to enjoy it. 3 weeks later, Emily sat beside Margaret's hospital bed, holding her hand as the morning sun streamed through the windows of Massachusetts General Hospital's oncology wing. The room was filled with flowers, roses from Richard, daisies from Detective Santos, and wildflowers from Tommy Marchetti's children, who'd sent them from their new home in Oregon where they were safely starting over. "Tell me again about the pink room," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible but her eyes still bright with love. Emily smiled, squeezing the frail fingers in her own. It had princess wallpaper with little castles, and a white canopy bed with pink curtains. There was a rocking horse by the window. Snow Princess, I called her. And every night, Papa would come in and sing to me before bed. What did he sing? "Hush. Little baby, don't say a word." Emily's voice was soft and melodic. "Papa's gonna buy you a mockingbird." Margaret's eyes fluttered closed as Emily continued the lullaby, the same song that had brought them all together and nearly torn them apart. In the 3 weeks since the confrontation at the fish processing plant, the whole truth had finally come to light. Charles Benton was in federal custody, facing charges that would keep him locked away for the rest of his life. The corruption network had been dismantled. With 17 people arrested, including 2 judges, 4 police officers, and 6 social workers who'd facilitated illegal adoptions for decades, the media attention had been overwhelming at first. Kidnapped heiress found after 25 years dominated headlines for weeks, but Richard's legal team had managed to shield Emily from the worst of it, and gradually the circus had moved on to other stories. "Is he here?" Margaret asked weakly. "Dad's in the hallway," Emily said. "He wanted to give us some privacy, but he's been here every day. Bring him in." "I want to tell you both something." Emily found Richard pacing the corridor, his usually perfect appearance rumpled from sleeping in waiting room chairs. The past 3 weeks had aged him, but there was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there since she'd known him. The peace of a man who'd finally found what he'd lost. "She wants to see us both," Emily said. Richard followed her back into the room, settling into the chair on the other side of Margaret's bed. For a moment, the 3 of them sat in comfortable silence. The father who'd grieved, the mother who'd protected, and the daughter who'd finally come home. "I need to tell you both something," Margaret said, her voice gaining strength from somewhere deep inside. "About Eleanor." Richard leaned forward. "Eleanor. She came to see me. The day before she died, she'd figured it out somehow. That I had Isabella, that she was alive." Emily felt her heart stop. "What?" "She didn't want the world to know. She was so broken by then, so consumed by grief and guilt. She thought Isabella was better off with me, away from all the pain and publicity." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "She made me promise to take care of her baby, to love her like she was my own." Richard's face had gone white. Eleanor knew. All those years, she knew Isabella was alive. She knew, and she chose to let me keep her, she said. Margaret's voice broke. She said she'd failed as a mother, that maybe Isabella deserved someone who could protect her better. "She didn't fail," Emily said fiercely. "And neither did you. You both loved me the only way you knew how." Margaret smiled through her tears. "She gave me this to give to you when the time was right." She reached under her pillow with trembling fingers and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. She wrote it the night before she died. Emily took the letter with shaking hands, recognizing the elegant script from family photos she'd seen. "To my darling Isabella," she read aloud. "If you are reading this, then you have found your way home at last." Emily's voice broke, and Richard continued reading. "I hope you can forgive me for not fighting harder to find you, for choosing to believe you were lost rather than searching every corner of the earth. I was weak when I should have been strong, broken when you needed me to be whole. But know that every day of my life since you were taken, I have loved you with all my heart. You are the best part of me and your father, And I pray that whatever life you've lived, it has been filled with the love and joy you deserve. Always remember that you are loved, that you are precious, that you are home. Love always, Mama." The three of them wept together, for lost years and found love, for the woman who died thinking she'd failed, and for the family that had finally been made whole again. "There's something else," Margaret whispered when they'd composed themselves. "In the safe deposit box at First National. The key is taped under the jewelry box in my apartment. Everything is there. Photos of you as a baby, Eleanor's personal letters, even some of your first drawings. She saved everything, hoping someday." Richard stood up abruptly and moved to the window, his shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. Emily could see him fighting to maintain control. This powerful man who'd built empires, but couldn't bring back the wife who died believing she'd lost everything. "She would be so proud," Emily said softly, "of the man you became, of how you never gave up hope, of how you fought to save Margaret even when it meant risking everything." Richard turned back to them, tears streaming down his face. "I loved her so much. If I'd known she was suffering alone, carrying that secret." "She knew you loved her," Margaret said firmly. "She told me that night, said you were the best man she'd ever known, that she was sorry she couldn't be strong enough to deserve you." "She deserved everything," Richard whispered. Margaret looked between them, her eyes growing heavy with exhaustion and medication. "Promise me something, both of you. Promise me you'll be a family, real family. No more secrets, no more lies, just love." "I promise," Emily said. "I promise," Richard echoed. Margaret smiled one last time, the expression transforming her ravaged features into something beautiful and peaceful. "Then I can rest now. My girls are both home where they belong." She closed her eyes, and Emily could see the tension leaving her body as she finally let go of 25 years of guilt and fear. Her breathing grew shallow, then stopped altogether. As quietly and peacefully as falling asleep, Emily held her hand for a long time after, unable to let go of the woman who'd given up everything to save her. Richard stood behind her chair, his hands on her shoulders, as they both said goodbye to the most selfless person either of them had ever known. 1 year later, Emily stood in front of the mirror in what had once been her childhood bedroom, adjusting the simple gold chain around her neck. The star pendant caught the morning light, a symbol of everything lost and found again. The room had been restored exactly as it was 25 years ago. Pink wallpaper with castles, white canopy bed, and Snow Princess, the rocking horse, by the window. "Ready?" Richard asked from the doorway, handsome in his black suit and proud beyond words. "Ready," Emily said, taking his offered arm. They walked together through the mansion's hallways, past portraits of Whitmore ancestors who seemed to smile their approval, to the conservatory where 50 guests waited for the dedication ceremony. The Margaret Davidson Memorial Children's Foundation would help locate missing children and reunite families torn apart by crime and corruption. Detective Santos was there, along with Tommy Marchetti and his family, flown in from Oregon for the occasion. There were social workers and child advocates, FBI agents who'd worked the case, and families who'd been helped by the investigation that had grown out of Emily's story. But as Emily looked out at the gathered crowd, she found herself thinking about the two women who weren't there. Eleanor, who'd loved her enough to let her go, and Margaret, who'd loved her enough to never let her forget where she belonged. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard said, his voice carrying easily through the room. 25 years ago, a crime was committed that destroyed one family and created another. Today, we honor the woman who turned that tragedy into love, who chose protection over revenge, who taught us all that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice. Emily stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "Margaret Davidson saved my life in every way a person can be saved. She gave me love when I was lost, hope when I was broken, and courage when I needed to find my way home. This foundation will ensure that other children get the same chance she gave me, the chance to be loved, to be safe, and to find their way back to where they belong." As the applause filled the room, Emily felt a presence beside her that had nothing to do with the living. She could almost hear Margaret's voice, proud and loving. "Hush, little baby. Don't you cry. Papa will never leave you again." Emily smiled through her tears, finally understanding that some lullabies aren't just songs. They're promises that love can survive anything, even 25 years of separation and lies. Their whispered assurances that family means coming home, no matter how long the journey takes, and in the mansion where it all began, surrounded by the people who'd helped write the end of her story, Emily Dawson Whitmore finally understood that she was exactly where she was always meant to be,